My dear friends, we are often troubled by suffering, as if it were a stranger that has knocked upon the door uninvited. We wonder, why has misfortune found me? Or, why has God allowed such sorrow into my life? But perhaps we should ask a different question. What if suffering is not merely a shadow, but a servant? Consider this. The greatest stories ever told are not tales of ease and comfort. They are stories of struggle, of loss, of darkness before the dawn. A hero without hardship is no hero at all, but merely a bystander in an uneventful world. If we too are part of God's great narrative, should we expect anything less? God does not waste our suffering. In fact, He often uses it to achieve what could not be accomplished in times of peace. A lump of coal must endure great pressure before it becomes a diamond. A tree's roots grow deeper only when the winds threaten to tear it down. So it is with the soul. Only through trials do we gain strength we never knew we had. We must remember also that our perspective is limited. We are like children who cry when our Father withholds a fleeting pleasure, not realizing that He is preparing for us a far greater joy. What we see as misfortune may, in the end, be the very thing that leads us to our true calling. And so, let us trust, not blindly as one who walks in darkness, but with faith in the one who holds the lamp. The road may be hard, but the destination is worth the journey. The trials we face today may be the very things that prepare us for blessings we cannot yet imagine. For God is the master of turning sorrow into song, ashes into beauty, and trials into triumphs. Let us not despise our hardships, but embrace them, knowing that in His hands even the darkest night leads to the most glorious dawn. Suffering to many appears as a cruel and senseless burden. It interrupts our comfort, disrupts our plans, and often leaves us questioning the goodness of God. Why must pain be a part of our journey? Why do we, who seek to live rightly, still encounter loss, disappointment, and hardship? The answer, though not always immediately apparent, is that suffering is one of the most powerful tools in the hand of God. It is not meaningless, nor is it random. Rather, it is a force that shapes us, refines us, and molds us into what we are meant to become. Consider the process by which gold is refined. It does not emerge from the earth in its purest form, shining and valuable. No, it must first pass through intense fire, where impurities are burned away. Only then does its true worth and brilliance come forth. The same is true of the soul. Left untested, we may remain comfortable but stagnant, content yet weak. It is through hardship that our character is forged, through struggle that we become more than we once were. Imagine a life devoid of all difficulty. Suppose from childhood to old age you never faced rejection, never experienced loss, never felt the weight of sorrow. Such a life, at first glance, may seem ideal, and yet what kind of person would emerge from it? Without hardship we would have no endurance, without failure, no wisdom, without pain, no true appreciation for joy. The greatest virtues, patience, perseverance, humility, and compassion, are rarely formed in ease. They are shaped in the fires of trial, where we learn to endure, to trust, and to grow. When we read stories, we do not admire the character who faces no difficulties. A hero who never encounters hardship, who never stumbles, and who never struggles, is not a hero at all. He is but an empty figure, without depth, without transformation. It is precisely because the hero suffers, because he fights against trials, that we are drawn to him. We see in his pain a reflection of our own struggles, and in his perseverance a reminder that we too can overcome. This, perhaps, is why so many of the greatest figures in history and faith were men and women who endured profound suffering. Joseph, the son of Jacob, was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. He had every reason to despair, to believe that God had abandoned him. And yet, those very hardships were preparing him for something far greater. Through his suffering, he learned wisdom, leadership, and reliance on God. When the time came, he was not merely a man who had suffered, but a man who had been transformed by suffering, ready to save his people in a time of famine. Likewise, the Apostle Paul, a man who faced shipwrecks, beatings, and imprisonment, did not curse God for his troubles. Instead, he recognized that through them he was being made stronger. "We also glory in our sufferings," he wrote, "because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." Romans 5:3-4. Here is a truth that many do not wish to hear. Suffering, though painful, has a purpose. It is not a sign of God's neglect, but rather a means by which he prepares us for something greater. Yet even knowing this, we may still resist. We may ask why a loving God would allow his children to go through hardship, but perhaps a better question is, what kind of love would shelter us so completely that we never learn to stand? A parent who loves their child does not remove every challenge. They do not carry them always, lest their legs grow too weak to walk. Instead, they allow them to struggle, to fall, to rise again, because they know that strength is not given, it is developed. In the same way, God does not shield us from all difficulty, for he knows that in struggle we find our true strength. Look at the strongest, most compassionate people you know. Are they those who have never known pain? Or are they the ones who have endured suffering and emerged with a heart that understands, with a faith that has been tested? There is a reason why those who have walked through fire often have the most wisdom. They have seen the depths of despair and have also discovered that, even there, God was with them. Even in nature, we find evidence of this truth. A tree that grows in a sheltered environment, shielded from wind and storm, develops weak roots. It may stand for a time, but when the first strong wind comes, it falls. But a tree that has faced storms, that has been bent by the wind and lashed by the rain, develops roots that grow deep and strong. It is this tree that withstands the storm, not because it was spared from hardship, but because hardship made it strong. So too it is with us. We are not meant to be fragile, to break at the first sign of trouble. We are meant to be resilient, to stand firm, to endure and overcome. And this strength is not born in comfort, but in trial. Therefore let us not see suffering as an enemy, but as a teacher. Let us not believe that hardship is proof of God's absence, but rather evidence of his work in our lives. For the very things that seem to break us are often the things that make us. And one day, when we look back, we may see that the trials we once feared were, in fact, the very tools that shaped us into who we were meant to be. When we encounter trials, we often see them as interruptions, unwelcome detours that disrupt our lives and push us away from what we perceive as our intended path. We mourn lost opportunities, shattered dreams, and unexpected obstacles, believing them to be signs that something has gone terribly wrong. Yet, this perspective is limited, for we judge our circumstances by what is immediately visible. while God sees far beyond our understanding. What appears to be misfortune from our vantage point may in His greater wisdom be the very thing necessary for our ultimate good. We as humans live within the confines of time. We see only the present moment and recall the past with fading clarity. The future, however, remains hidden from us, veiled in mystery. This limitation makes it difficult for us to understand how temporary suffering might contribute to a greater purpose. God, however, exists outside of time. He sees the entire story at once, beginning, middle, and end. He understands how each event fits together in a way that we cannot yet comprehend. To us, pain may seem unnecessary and hardship unjust, but, from His eternal perspective, they may be precisely what is needed to bring about a greater good. Consider a child who is taken to a doctor for an unpleasant but necessary procedure. The child, unable to grasp the larger picture, perceives only pain and discomfort. He may even believe that his parent has betrayed him by allowing such suffering. But the parent knows better. The discomfort is temporary. The healing it brings is lasting. In much the same way, we may feel abandoned or mistreated when life does not go as we planned, when hardships persist, and when our prayers seem unanswered. Yet, if we could see what God sees, we would understand that our suffering is not wasted. It is shaping something far greater than we can yet perceive. There is an old saying that no artist paints without purpose, and no author writes without direction. A story must have conflict, a painting must have shadows, and a piece of music must have tension before resolution. The same is true of life. If we were to remove every hardship, every sorrow, and every trial from our journey, we would be left with something hollow, an existence without depth, without contrast, without meaning. It is in the valleys of life, in the moments of uncertainty and challenge, that we are most shaped into who we are meant to be. We see this truth throughout Scripture and history. Time and again, those who appeared to be suffering without reason were, in fact, being prepared for something greater. Take, for example, Joseph, whose betrayal by his brothers led to years of hardship, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. From a human perspective, his suffering seemed cruel and undeserved. Yet when the time was right, God elevated him to a position of power in Egypt, using him to save an entire nation from famine. Had Joseph never been sold into slavery, had he never faced injustice, he would not have been in the right place at the right time to fulfill God's greater plan. We might also consider Moses, who spent 40 years in exile before being called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. He may have thought those years were wasted, but in truth, they were a time of preparation. The wilderness he wandered would one day become the very land through which he would guide God's people. His trials were not meaningless, they were necessary. Even in our own lives, we may one day look back and see that what we thought were obstacles were actually stepping stones. The job we lost, the relationship that ended, the opportunity that passed us by, these things, painful as they were, may have been the very circumstances that led us to something far greater. But in the moment, we rarely see it. We fixate on the closed door, forgetting that it may have been closed to redirect us toward a better one. We are often like passengers on a train, staring out of a narrow window. We see only what is immediately outside, trees passing by, distant mountains, perhaps a stretch of barren land. We may grow anxious when we pass through a tunnel, suddenly surrounded by darkness, feeling as though we have been abandoned. Yet the conductor, who sees the full route from above, knows exactly where the train is headed. He knows that the tunnel is not the destination, but merely a passage that leads to something better. So it is with God. When we find ourselves in a dark place, we must remember that He has not lost control. What seems to us like an ending may, in reality, be a beginning. It is not easy to trust when we cannot see the outcome. It is difficult to believe that suffering has purpose when all we feel is pain. Yet, if we could step outside of time, if we could see what God sees, we would understand that no hardship is wasted. Every moment of suffering, every delay, every disappointment is part of a greater story. When we face trials, we must remind ourselves that our perspective is limited. What seems like failure today may be the foundation for tomorrow's success. What appears to be loss may in time prove to be a gain. The suffering we endure now may be preparing us for blessings we cannot yet imagine. Our task is not to understand every twist and turn of the journey, but to trust the one who guides it. He sees the whole picture. He knows where the road leads. And in the end, we will come to see that even our most difficult trials were, in His hands, part of a masterpiece far greater than we ever dreamed. Faith is often spoken of in gentle terms, a source of comfort, a warm assurance that all will be well. But true faith is not merely a feeling of peace in favorable circumstances. It is a deliberate act of trust, even when the evidence before us suggests otherwise. It is believing in the goodness of God when life appears harsh, in His presence when we feel abandoned, and in His plan when everything seems to be falling apart. Faith is not tested when the path is clear and the road is smooth. It is tested in the moments of darkness, when we stand at the edge of uncertainty and must decide whether to trust or to fear. Trusting in divine providence does not mean we will always understand what is happening. It does not mean we will always see the purpose behind our suffering or grasp the reasons for our struggles. What it does mean is that we accept, even in confusion, that there is a plan beyond what we can see. It means acknowledging that our wisdom is limited, but God's is infinite. We often desire immediate answers, clarity and resolution, but faith calls us to rest in the knowledge that, even when we do not have the answers, God does. There are many times in life when we stand at the edge of what seems like disaster. A door closes, an opportunity slips away, a painful loss shakes us to our core. In these moments, we are tempted to believe that God has forgotten us, or that He has turned His face away. But divine providence does not mean that God only leads us through places of comfort. Often He takes us through difficulty to prepare us for something far greater. Abraham was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. He was asked to trust in a promise that seemed impossible, that he would have descendants as numerous as the stars, even when he and his wife were well past the age of childbearing. From a human perspective, it was unreasonable to believe such a thing. But faith does not rely on human reasoning. It rests on the certainty of God's character. Abraham chose to believe, not because he had evidence, but because he trusted the one who had spoken the promise. Trusting in God's providence means walking forward even when we cannot see the road ahead. It means surrendering our plans and expectations, knowing that He is guiding us towards something better, even if the journey is difficult. It is easy to have faith when all is going well, but the real test comes when life is unpredictable, when prayers seem unanswered, when suffering lingers longer than we expected. There is a great temptation to take control when things do not go as planned. We grasp at solutions, try to force outcomes, and resist the waiting seasons. But faith requires us to let go. It asks us to believe that God's timing is better than ours, that His ways are higher, and that His provision, though sometimes delayed in our eyes, is always perfect. The Israelites, after being freed from slavery in Egypt, were led into the wilderness. They expected immediate entry into the promised land, yet they found themselves wandering for 40 years. In their impatience they doubted, complained, and even longed to return to Egypt. They could not understand that what seemed like a delay was actually a time of preparation. They were being refined, taught, and made ready to enter the land that had been promised. So it is with us. We, too, find ourselves in seasons of waiting, of uncertainty, of hardship, and we, too, are tempted to believe that if things are not happening according to our timeline, they are not happening at all. But God is not inactive. Even in the waiting, He is working. Even in the struggle, He is leading. If we could see the full picture, we would understand that the delays are not rejections, but redirections. The hardships are not meaningless, but purposeful. Faith is not simply believing that God exists. It is trusting that He is good, even when life does not feel good. It is holding on when circumstances urge us to let go. It is saying, "I do not understand, but I trust you." This is the kind of faith that carries us through trials, that keeps us anchored when the storm rages, that allows us to move forward when the way is unclear. There is no safer place to be than in the hands of God, even if that place is not where we expect it to be. The story of our lives is not random. Each step, each struggle, each unexpected turn is part of a greater plan. We may not understand it now, but one day we will look back and see that through every twist and turn, God was leading us exactly where we needed to be. Faith is not seeing, it is trusting, and those who trust in Him will never be put to shame. It is a common assumption that blessings must come in the form of ease, prosperity, and success. We equate God's favor with open doors, smooth paths, and immediate rewards. But life often unfolds in a way that contradicts this expectation. Instead of clear direction, we face uncertainty. Instead of ease, we encounter struggle. Instead of immediate answers, we are met with silence. In these moments, it is tempting to believe that something has gone wrong, that we have been forgotten, or that our suffering is meaningless. Yet, if we look closely, we will see that many of God's greatest blessings come in ways we least expect. Difficulty, though painful, is often the very thing that prepares us for something greater. We pray for strength, yet strength is built through trials. We desire wisdom, yet wisdom is gained through experience, often in moments of failure or hardship. We seek deeper faith, yet faith grows in seasons of uncertainty. What we perceive as obstacles may, in fact, be opportunities in disguise. What we view as losses may be the foundation upon which something greater is being built. There are countless examples of this truth throughout history and Scripture. Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers and sold into slavery, could not have imagined that his suffering would position him to become the second most powerful man in Egypt. When he was thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit, it seemed as though his life had taken a tragic turn. Yet through this hardship he was placed in a position to interpret Pharaoh's dream, an event that ultimately led to his rise in power and the salvation of many. Looking back, Joseph himself recognized this truth when he told his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. What seemed like misfortune was, in reality, a divine setup for something far greater. Consider also the Israelites. When they were trapped between the Red Sea and the approaching Egyptian army, it appeared as though they were doomed. They saw only an impossible situation, but God saw an opportunity for deliverance. What seemed to be a dead end became the stage for one of the greatest miracles in history. The very obstacle in their path, the sea, was the means by which God demonstrated his power and secured their freedom. We often pray for God to remove our struggles, yet it is within these struggles that we find our deepest blessings. A person who has never faced difficulty cannot truly appreciate victory. A heart that has never been broken cannot fully understand compassion. A life without trials may seem desirable, but it would be a shallow existence, lacking depth, growth, and true dependence on God. Even in our personal lives, we can often see, in hindsight, that some of our greatest challenges led to unexpected blessings. Perhaps the job we desperately wanted but did not get pushed us toward an even better opportunity. Perhaps the relationship that ended, though painful at the time, ultimately freed us to find something more fulfilling. Perhaps a season of loneliness or uncertainty forced us to develop a deeper relationship with God, one that would sustain us far beyond what human relationships ever could. Pain has a way of stripping away our illusions, revealing what truly matters. It humbles us, reminds us of our dependence on God, and reshapes our priorities. It is in these moments of struggle that we often grow the most, even if we do not realize it at the time. Many of God's greatest blessings do not come in the form of material wealth or immediate success, but in the transformation that hardship brings. One of the clearest examples of a blessing disguised as suffering is found in the life of Jesus himself. His crucifixion was, to all appearances, a tragedy. His followers mourned, believing that all hope was lost. And yet, what seemed like the greatest defeat was actually the greatest victory. The suffering of the cross led to the resurrection, the salvation of mankind, and the fulfillment of God's plan. The blessing of redemption came through suffering, proving that God's ways are often beyond our understanding. Trusting that blessings can come through hardship requires faith. It demands that we look beyond our immediate circumstances and believe that God is at work, even when we cannot see it. This is not always easy, but it is essential. The very things we wish to avoid, the disappointments, the delays, the struggles, may be the very things shaping us into who we are meant to be. God does not waste pain. Every trial serves a purpose. Every closed door is a redirection. Every hardship carries within it the potential for something greater. If we can learn to see our struggles not as obstacles but as opportunities, we will come to realize that even in our darkest moments, God is working for our good. The blessings may not come in the way we expect, but they will come. And when they do, we will see that the journey, with all its difficulties, was worth it.